Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's always so nice to have you here. Tonight, we're talking about the Labyrinth, one of the most famous locations in all of Greek mythology. According to the myths, the Labyrinth was an enormous underground maze built beneath the island of Crete thousands of years ago. Ancient storytellers described it as so massive and impossibly confusing that once someone entered, they could never find their way back out again. Some believed the corridors twisted endlessly in circles. Others claimed the maze felt almost alive, designed to trap people forever beneath the earth. And hidden somewhere at the center of it all was the Minotaur, a creature said to be half man and half bull. Some historians even believe the myth may have been inspired by the massive palace of Knossos in Crete, which was so large and complicated that visitors could easily become lost inside it. But according to mythology, the real labyrinth was built as a prison designed to hide a monster the royal family desperately wanted the world to forget. And strangely enough, the entire story began with a beautiful white bull rising from the sea. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and let me know where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. And if you enjoy these deep sleep stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps support the channel and allows me to continue making more of your favorite content. All right then, get comfortable, and let's begin. Long before the Minotaur, before the Labyrinth, before heroes began disappearing beneath the palace of Crete, there was a king named Minos. According to Greek mythology, Minos wanted to become ruler of Crete, but like many kings in the ancient world, he needed to prove that the gods supported his claim. So he prayed to Poseidon, the god of the sea, asking for a divine sign. And Poseidon answered. From the ocean emerged a magnificent white bull. The creature was enormous, radiant, and unlike anything the people of Crete had ever seen before. Its hide gleamed almost silver beneath the sunlight as it rose from the sea foam onto the shore. To the people watching, the message was obvious. Poseidon had chosen Minos, but there was one condition. Minos was supposed to sacrifice the bull to honor the god once his kingship was secured. And at first, Minos agreed. But when he finally saw the animal standing before him, he hesitated. The bull was too beautiful, too rare, too perfect to destroy. So instead, Minos secretly kept the white bull for himself and sacrificed an ordinary one in its place, hoping Poseidon would not notice, which, in Greek mythology, is usually a terrible idea, because the gods always notice. And according to the myths, Poseidon became furious. But instead of striking Crete with storms or earthquakes, the god chose something far stranger. A curse, one that would slowly destroy Minos' family from within. The punishment centered around Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphae. For reasons only Greek mythology can truly explain, Poseidon caused Pasiphae to become unnaturally obsessed with the white bull itself. Yes, ancient Greek mythology becomes very weird sometimes. According to the stories, Pasiphae eventually sought help from the brilliant inventor Daedalus, who would later become famous for creating the labyrinth. Daedalus constructed a hollow wooden cow covered in real hide so the queen could approach the sacred bull unnoticed. And from this deeply cursed situation, the Minotaur was born, a child that was neither fully human nor fully beast, half man, half bull. Interestingly, the name Minotaur literally means the bull of Minos, forever linking the creature to the king whose actions caused the curse in the first place. At first, the creature was small enough to hide, but as time passed, the Minotaur grew larger, stronger, and far more dangerous. Eventually, even King Minos realized the monster could no longer remain hidden inside the palace. Something had to be built. something capable of imprisoning a creature no ordinary walls could contain. And so, beneath the island of Crete, construction of the labyrinth began. As the Minotaur continued growing, King Minos realized the creature could no longer remain hidden inside the palace of Crete. According to the myths, the monster became too dangerous, too frightening, and too impossible to control. Some stories claimed servants vanished beneath the palace after wandering too close to its underground chambers. Others said the sounds of the creature could sometimes be heard echoing through the stone halls, late at night. And so Minos once again turned to Daedalus, the brilliant inventor responsible for many of Crete's greatest creations. This time, he ordered him to build something impossible, a prison no creature could ever escape. And so, beneath the palace of Knossos, Daedalus began constructing the labyrinth. Ancient storytellers described it as an enormous underground maze filled with endless stone corridors twisting beneath the earth. Passageways doubled back on themselves. Stairways led nowhere. Doors opened into dead ends and dark chambers lit only by flickering torchlight. Some myths even claimed the maze felt almost alive, as though it intentionally guided people deeper into its center. And hidden somewhere in the darkness below, the Minotaur waited. The creature was imprisoned deep within the heart of the labyrinth, far away from the surface world above. And over time, stories about the maze spread across Greece. Sailors whispered about it in crowded harbors. Travelers spoke of strange sounds beneath the palace at night. Some believed the Minotaur was simply a myth meant to frighten children. Others feared something truly monstrous lived beneath Crete, but eventually, the horror hidden inside the labyrinth became impossible to ignore, because the monster needed to be fed, and soon, another kingdom would become trapped in the nightmare beneath Crete. As King Minos' power continued growing across the Mediterranean, Crete became one of the most feared kingdoms in the ancient world. But eventually, conflict arose between Crete and the city of Athens. The trouble began after the death of Minos' son, Prince Androgeus. Stories about his death vary depending on the version of the myth. Some claimed he was murdered by jealous rivals in Athens after winning athletic competitions. Others believed he was sent to hunt a dangerous bull near Marathon and never returned. Either way, Minos blamed the Athenians, and in response, Crete went to war. Athens eventually lost the conflict and was forced into a terrible agreement. Every several years, young men and women from Athens would be sent across the sea to Crete as tribute, not as prisoners, not as servants, but as sacrifices. Their destination was the labyrinth beneath the palace of Knossos. And once they entered the maze, they were never seen again. Ancient writers often described the tribute ships as silent and mournful. Families gathered near the harbor to say goodbye to children they knew would likely never return home. Black sails drifted slowly across the sea toward Crete, and beneath the palace, the Minotaur waited in darkness. Over time, fear of the creature spread throughout Greece. Parents frightened children with stories about the monster beneath the earth. Travelers avoided speaking too loudly about Crete after sunset. And for the people chosen as tribute, entering the labyrinth became almost like a living funeral, because no one escaped the maze. At least, not before Theseus. Theseus was the prince of Athens, the son of King Aegeus. Unlike Hercules, who was known for overwhelming strength, Theseus became famous for his courage and intelligence. And after years of watching Athens sacrifice its people to Crete, Theseus finally made a decision. He would enter the labyrinth himself. He publicly announced his decision before the people of Athens, and his father was horrified, because everyone understood what entering the labyrinth meant, almost certain death. But Theseus refused to change his mind. Before the ship departed, King Aegeus made one final request. If Theseus survived and returned home safely, he was to replace the ship's black sails with white ones before sailing back into Athens. That way, the city would know their prince was still alive. It sounded like a simple promise, but Greek mythology has a habit of turning small, forgotten details into tragedy. And so, beneath dark sails and uncertain skies, Theseus sailed toward Crete, toward the labyrinth, and toward the monster waiting beneath the palace. When Theseus finally arrived in Crete, the palace of King Minos was nothing like he expected. The kingdom was wealthy, powerful, and filled with towering halls overlooking the sea. Music echoed through the courtyards. Torches burned through the night. And somewhere far below the palace, hidden beneath layers of stone, lay the labyrinth. But before Theseus ever entered the maze, someone inside the palace had already noticed him. Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos. In most versions of the myth, Ariadne immediately becomes fascinated by the young prince from Athens. Perhaps it was his courage. Perhaps it was the hopelessness of his situation. Or perhaps, like many stories in Greek mythology, the gods themselves quietly interfered. Some legends even say Aphrodite, the goddess of love, caused Ariadne to fall deeply in love with Theseus the moment she saw him. Whatever the reason, Ariadne made a dangerous decision. She would help him survive the labyrinth. Late at night, while the palace slept and the sea winds drifted through the halls of Crete, Ariadne secretly met with Theseus before he entered the maze. She warned him that defeating the Minotaur would not be enough. The real danger was finding a way back out, because the labyrinth was designed to confuse anyone who entered it. Even if Theseus survived the creature itself, he would still become trapped underground forever. And so Ariadne gave him two things: a sword and a ball of thread. Her plan was simple. As Theseus walked deeper into the maze, he would slowly unwind the thread behind him, creating a path back toward the entrance. Honestly, it's one of the oldest and smartest survival strategies in mythology. And thousands of years later, the phrase Ariadne's thread is still sometimes used to describe something that guides people through difficult or confusing situations. With the thread tied near the entrance of the labyrinth, Theseus prepared to descend beneath the palace. Ancient storytellers often imagined this moment quietly, torchlight flickering against the stone walls. The distant sound of waves outside the palace. Ariadne standing in silence as Theseus disappeared into the darkness below, not knowing whether she would ever see him again. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, the Minotaur was waiting. With Ariadne's thread tied securely near the entrance, Theseus stepped into the labyrinth alone. At first, the maze was almost completely silent. Only the sound of distant dripping water echoed through the underground corridors beneath the palace. The deeper he walked, the colder the air became. Torchlight flickered weakly against the stone walls, casting long shadows that shifted strangely across the passageways. Every corridor looked almost identical to the last. Stone, darkness, more twisting corridors disappearing into the earth. Behind him, the thread slowly unwound across the floor of the maze, one thin line connecting him back to the surface world above. Ancient storytellers often imagined the labyrinth less like a building and more like a living thing, a place designed to confuse the human mind itself. Some passages suddenly narrowed without warning. Others opened into massive underground chambers swallowed by darkness. At times, Theseus could no longer even hear the sounds of the palace or the sea above him. Only silence remained. And somewhere far ahead, something else was breathing. Slow, heavy, animal-like. Theseus continued deeper into the maze. the sound appeared again, a distant scraping somewhere beyond the torchlight. Then silence, then footsteps, not human footsteps, something slower, heavier. The stories never fully agree on what the Minotaur looked like. Some ancient artists portrayed the creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. Others imagined something far larger and more monstrous. But nearly every version of the myth describes the same feeling surrounding it. Fear. Not just fear of death, but fear of becoming trapped forever beneath the earth with something hunting you in the darkness. As Theseus moved deeper through the corridors, the air became thick with the smell of smoke, stone, and damp earth. The torchlight shook slightly in his hand. And then he saw it. A massive silhouette standing motionless at the far end of the chamber. For a moment, neither moved. The creature's breathing echoed through the darkness. Ancient writers often described the Minotaur less as an intelligent villain and more as something tragic. A cursed creature imprisoned since birth inside a maze beneath the earth. Part human, part beast, abandoned by the world above. But when the Minotaur finally charged, the silence of the labyrinth shattered instantly. The battle itself is described differently depending on the version of the myth. Some say Theseus used the sword Ariadne gave him. Others claimed he defeated the creature with his bare hands. But eventually, after a violent struggle somewhere deep beneath Crete, the Minotaur fell. And for the first time in years, the labyrinth became silent again. Far above the maze, Ariadne waited in darkness beside the entrance, listening for footsteps returning from below. For a few moments after the Minotaur fell, the labyrinth became completely silent. No footsteps, no breathing in the darkness. Only the faint crackling of torchlight echoing through the underground maze. Somewhere behind him, Ariadne's thread still stretched through the corridors, like a lifeline leading back toward the surface. And so Theseus followed it. Step by step, he retraced his path through the twisting stone passages beneath Crete, until he finally emerged from the labyrinth alive. For the first time in years, someone had entered the maze and returned. Ariadne was waiting near the entrance when he emerged from the darkness. And according to the myths, the two quickly fled Crete together before King Minos could discover what had happened below the palace. Under moonlit skies, Theseus, Ariadne, and the surviving Athenian youths escaped onto a ship and sailed away from the island. Behind them, Crete slowly disappeared into the darkness of the sea. And somewhere beneath the palace, the labyrinth now stood empty. At first, the escape must have felt almost unreal. The Minotaur was dead. The curse of the maze was finally broken. Athens was free. But Greek mythology rarely allows its heroes peaceful endings for very long. As the journey continued across the Aegean Sea, the ship eventually stopped at the island of Knossos. And there, one of the strangest and saddest moments in the entire story takes place. Because somehow, Theseus left Ariadne behind. Different versions of the myth explain it differently. Some stories claim the gods commanded Theseus to abandon her. Others say Dionysus, the god of wine and celebration, had fallen in love with Ariadne and demanded she remain on the island. And in less flattering versions of the story, Theseus simply abandoned her on his own. Whatever the truth may have been, Ariadne awoke to find the ship gone. Theseus had already sailed away across the sea. It's a surprisingly melancholy ending for one of the most important characters in the myth. After all, without Ariadne's thread, Theseus would never have escaped the labyrinth at all. But Ariadne's story does not end entirely in tragedy. In later myths, Dionysus eventually marries her, and some legends even say the gods granted her immortality among the stars. Meanwhile, Theseus continued sailing home toward Athens. But in his exhaustion and relief after surviving the labyrinth, he forgot something important: the sails. Before leaving Athens, he had promised his father, King Aegeus, that if he survived, he would replace the ship's black sails with white ones before returning home. But as the ship approached the coast, the black sails still remained. And when Aegeus saw them from the cliffs above the sea, he believed his son had died. Overcome with grief, the king threw himself into the water below, and according to the myth, the sea was later named the Aegean Sea after him. So even after escaping the labyrinth, the story still ended in loss. Because in Greek mythology, victory and tragedy often travel together. After returning from Crete, Theseus eventually became king of Athens, and for a time, he was celebrated as a hero throughout Greece. Many ancient writers credited him with helping unite the smaller regions around Athens into a stronger kingdom, transforming the city into one of the rising powers of the ancient world. But like many heroes in Greek mythology, Theseus's story did not end after defeating a monster. In many ways, his tragedies were only beginning. As the years passed, Theseus became involved in more adventures across Greece. At one point, he married Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, the legendary society of female warriors said to live far beyond the Greek world. Together, they had a son named Hippolytus. After Hippolyta died from the conflict with Hercules, Theseus married another woman named Phaedra. Phaedra eventually fell in love with Hippolytus, the son of Theseus from an earlier marriage. But Hippolytus rejected her completely. Humiliated and overcome with grief, Phaedra falsely accused him of attacking her before taking her own life. When Theseus discovered the accusation, he was devastated and furious. Believing his son had betrayed him, he prayed to Poseidon to punish Hippolytus, and Poseidon answered. As Hippolytus rode his chariot near the sea, a monstrous creature suddenly emerged from the water, terrifying the horses. The chariot crashed violently, dragging Hippolytus to his death. Only later did Theseus learn the truth. His son had been innocent all along, but perhaps the strangest chapter of Theseus's life came later, when he travelled alongside his closest companion, Pirithous. The two heroes became famous for making reckless promises to one another, and eventually Pirithous proposed something completely impossible. He wanted to travel into the underworld itself and kidnap Persephone, the queen of the dead. Honestly, this was an unbelievably terrible plan, even by Greek mythology standards. But somehow, Theseus agreed to help him. The journey ended exactly as badly as you would expect. After entering the underworld, the two heroes were trapped by Hades himself. Some versions of the myth say they became magically bound to enormous stone chairs and could no longer stand. Others claimed the earth itself imprisoned them beneath the realm of the dead. Either way, their mission failed completely. Pirithous never escaped. But years later, during his final labor, Hercules descended into the underworld and managed to rescue Theseus from his imprisonment. Even after surviving the labyrinth, Theseus had once again narrowly escaped death. But by the time he finally returned home to Athens, the city had changed. His popularity had faded. Political enemies had risen against him. And eventually, Theseus was forced into exile on the island of Skyros. There, the local king, Lycomedes, began to fear the aging hero's reputation and influence. So one day, while guiding Theseus along the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea, Lycomedes suddenly pushed him to his death. And so ended the life of the man who survived the labyrinth. Not in battle, not against monsters, but alone, far from home, falling into the sea below. But the story of the labyrinth does not end with Theseus, because hidden behind the rise of kings, the death of monsters, and the fall of heroes, was another figure quietly connected to everything from the very beginning. Daedalus, the brilliant craftsman who designed the labyrinth beneath Crete, the inventor whose creations changed the fate of everyone around him. And after helping Theseus escape the maze, Daedalus soon found himself trapped by the very king he once served. King Minos discovered that Daedalus had secretly aided Ariadne and the Athenians, and he was furious. The man who built the labyrinth had betrayed him. So Minos imprisoned Daedalus and his young son, Icarus, within Crete itself. Some versions of the myth say they were locked inside a tower overlooking the sea. Others claimed Minos kept them trapped near the labyrinth they had once created together. But either way, one thing quickly became clear. Escape by land was impossible. Escape by sea was heavily guarded, and so Daedalus began searching for another way out. Eventually, the inventor turned his eyes toward the sky. Over many weeks, Daedalus carefully gathered feathers dropped by seabirds along the cliffs and shoreline of Crete. Some were small, others large. Piece by piece, he fastened them together using thread and wax until they formed enormous wings. One pair for himself, and one pair for Icarus. It's honestly one of the most beautiful images in all of Greek mythology. A father and son standing above the sea at dawn, preparing to escape the world using wings made by human hands. But before they departed, Daedalus gave his son a warning. He told Icarus not to fly too low above the ocean, where the sea mist would soak the feathers and drag him downward. But he also warned him not to fly too high, because the heat of the sun would melt the wax holding the wings together. Instead, Daedalus told him to follow the middle path, not too high, not too low, and for a while, the escape worked. The two rose above the cliffs of Crete and soared out across the open sea. Below them, waves shimmered beneath the morning sunlight. The island slowly disappeared behind them, and for the first time in years, they were truly free. But as Icarus flew higher into the sky, something changed. Perhaps it was excitement, perhaps wonder, or perhaps the dangerous feeling humans sometimes experience after surviving impossible things. The feeling that they can now escape every limit. Ignoring his father's warnings, Icarus continued climbing higher and higher toward the sun. And slowly, the wax began to melt. Feathers drifted away into the wind above the sea. At first only a few, then many more, until suddenly the wings completely fell apart, and Icarus began falling from the sky. Ancient storytellers often imagined Daedalus desperately calling out for his son as feathers scattered across the air above the ocean. But there was nothing he could do. Icarus disappeared into the sea below, and according to the legend, the waters where he fell later became known as the Icaria Sea. Daedalus survived the journey alone, but like so many stories in Greek mythology, freedom came with a terrible cost. And somehow, that became the final shadow hanging over the story of the labyrinth itself. A kingdom destroyed by pride, a monster born from a curse, heroes lost to tragedy, and a father left alone beneath an empty sky. As for King Minos, his story did not end with the labyrinth either. Even after the death of the Minotaur and the escape of Theseus, Minos remained one of the most powerful rulers in Greek mythology. Ancient writers often portrayed him as a complicated figure, wise and respected by some, cruel and prideful to others, a king whose desire for power ultimately brought disaster upon his own family. After Daedalus escaped Crete, Minos became obsessed with finding the inventor who had betrayed him. Some stories say he traveled from kingdom to kingdom searching for him, carrying a strange challenge wherever he went. Minos possessed a spiral seashell and claimed he would reward anyone capable of threading a string completely through its twisting interior. No one could solve it. At least, not until the shell eventually reached Daedalus himself. The inventor tied the string to an ant, which crawled through the shell, carrying the thread behind it. And immediately, Minos realized only Daedalus could have solved the puzzle. The discovery eventually led Minos to Sicily, where Daedalus had taken refuge under the protection of a local king. But before Minos could capture him, the king's daughters secretly intervened. While Minos was bathing, they poured boiling water over him, killing the king before he could reclaim the inventor. And so ended the life of the ruler whose choices had created the labyrinth. But strangely enough, Greek mythology says Minos' story continued even after death. According to later legends, Minos became one of the 3 judges of the dead in the underworld, alongside Rhadamanthus and Iarchus. There, deep beneath the earth, Minos was said to sit upon a throne and judge the souls of mortals after death, deciding where they belonged in the afterlife. Which feels strangely fitting. The king who once built a prison beneath the earth eventually became part of another kingdom beneath the earth himself. And in many ways, that's what makes Greek mythology so fascinating. The stories rarely end cleanly. Heroes survive monsters only to face tragedy later. Kings gain power only to lose everything through pride. And even death itself is rarely the true ending. The myths simply continue, flowing from one story into another across generations of gods, monsters, and heroes. Hope you enjoyed today's story. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know which mythology story you'd like to hear next. Until then, get some rest, and I'll see you in the next story. Good night.